Hi, this is Jason Gill. So this is going to just be a quick on defining the ecosystem of critical infrastructure, critical innovation, national security innovation. The United States is in a constant battle with our adversaries, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and much of it requires that we keep innovating, keep moving the ball forward on the various technology domains that are going to impact not only our national security, but our economic supply chains and our citizen services. My whole career has been around facilitating partnerships that resolve the workforce development and science/tech innovation required for keeping the United States operational. And much of that has been in the defense and intelligence community, but I also have worked heavily in energy, information technology, government facilities, critical manufacturing, communications, financial services, healthcare, etc. And when we think about critical innovation, we're talking about what the United States needs to stay competitive, and it's the AI, it's the quantum, it's the advanced energy solutions that are going to fuel the AI generation as well as energy independence. It's the space systems, it's microelectronics, it's building out the way that humans interact with robotics, it's the robotics themselves, hypersonics, etc. So there's a lot of different fields that each make up subdomains within critical innovation. And I've been in the space since the early 2000s, but I've seen the waves that happen, and the waves go from the research phase to the mass adoption to the obsolescence. And we think about these in waves of adoption from the national security and critical infrastructure sectors. And we've seen wave after wave come. So, it started off with the computing wave back in the 40s and the 50s, and the national laboratories were stood up to be focusing on advanced energy and have been the center of the nation's research ever since. But after 9/11, we started thinking about IT modernization. How do we de-silo the various networks? Then we figured out how to build out cloud and data resilient infrastructures. Once we connected up everything, we needed to then protect it from China, Russia, Iran, North Korea burrowing their way throughout our systems. Now we're in the artificial intelligence wave. What comes next is the quantum wave, but that's just on information technology. If we think about our weapon systems, if we think about our space systems, they all have these continuous waves. When we look specifically at the U.S. cybersecurity rollout, we're doing so because we can see a pattern that occurs, and it occurs over and over and over again, especially anytime there's a compliance requirement. It starts off in the defense and intelligence community. What do we mean by that? Well, if we're talking about laser systems, the United States government is advancing our weaponry first for the national security marketplace. And so whenever we're thinking about how do we secure those systems, we think the first and most immediate need for critical innovation is that national security customer base. Then we go from the DoD intel community to all of the federal agencies, as well as a rollout to the state and local governments. And similarly, at the same time, we tend to roll out to the enterprise organizations that are in critical infrastructure sectors, those biggest that are quote unquote too big to fail. We want to make sure that they're locking down their vulnerabilities as well. The resources that enterprise organizations have tend to dwarf the resources of the medium and the small businesses. So the compliance organizations, the regulatory bodies, delay the requirements for the small and medium-sized businesses until the solutions providers are providing economies of scale. So what do we think about that? Well, when we're looking at a curve, there gets to be a point of time where you've got the early adopters, you've got the mandated adopters, and then you got the next generation of mandated adopters. And the funny part is when you get to about here, where there is enough market demand that the massive consulting firms like KPMG are going to roll out their solutions. Well, by the time you get to here, and we're talking about saturation, KPMG has figured out how to provide this offering at a discount or at economy of scale. And it's really the end of the time where there's a value in coming in as an early entrant into the marketplace. In fact, if you come in too early, if you get there before there's actually a customer buying, well, you're minimizing your return on investment. But if you can time it correctly, if you can get down as far down into that curve as possible, you have this longest period of maximizing your return on investment, your shareholder creation. When you're looking at the enterprise organizations, there's really two buckets. There's the massives like the Navy Federal Credit Union that are well resourced to respond to the high regulations, but then you have this second tier of enterprise organizations, the ones that I call the under-resourced but highly regulated enterprises in the 16 critical infrastructure sectors, like Tower Federal Credit Union, the NSA's credit union, and Northwest Federal Credit Union, the CIA's credit union. Now, I've done my projects across the ecosystem for 22 years, and every one of my projects has been, how do we get to build relationships with organizations that are on the other side at some other point in the critical innovation ecosystem? And oftentimes that has meant doing one-on-one outreaches. It meant doing large audience events, but it's always about conveying a complex message to the right stakeholders on the other side and capturing data around them. When you go from there and you start thinking about what is the government's role in making sure that these critical infrastructure sectors are actually secure, that they're actually moving forward. Well, the government tends to invest in 6 different types of things. The real estate and infrastructure, it's always much larger than what private industry can afford on its own. It's workforce development. How do we work with the universities? How do we work with our education system to develop the skill sets required for those 16 critical infrastructure sectors? How do we develop and procure skilled services? And that's the whole world of government contracting. Then there's a space of critical innovation or research and development, federal funding of national laboratory research, university research, non-traditionals like small business government contractors. Then there is a component of, well, you've created the solution, we will do the test and validation. We'll stand up a sandbox, we'll bring our subject matter experts. And then the last part is we oftentimes see the government playing a role of investment incentives, the tax credits, the rebates, the grants. And really the government's always doing this carrot and stick. They're going to pick up the costs that are too great for private industry, especially those under-resourced in the 16 critical infrastructure sectors. And then all the compliance is the stick, making sure that organizations are compliant.